The Walking Dead is filled with the dead, but the real monsters were never the ones shambling through empty streets. They were the ones still breathing, from a best friend who couldn't let go, to a governor who built paradise on lies, to a man with a baseball bat who rewrote the rules entirely. Why do some survivors cling to their humanity while others shed it like dead skin? Shane Walsh. Before the world ended, Shane Walsh was the man you wanted watching your back. Deputy Sheriff, Rick Grimes' partner, best friend since childhood. And then Rick woke up, and Shane realized he'd been living a life that was never his to keep. The transformation didn't start with jealousy, it started with survival. When Rick flatlined in that hospital and the world collapsed, Shane made a choice. Save Lori and Carl, get them out, keep them breathing. He became their protector. And somewhere between Atlanta and the quarry camp, Shane stopped being Rick's friend and started being Lori's man. Not because he manipulated her, because he thought Rick was dead. But Rick came back, and Shane's entire identity evaporated in a single reunion. The camp didn't need two leaders. Lori didn't want two men. And Shane, who had spent months holding everything together, suddenly had nothing. What makes Shane tragic isn't that he was wrong, it's that he was right. He saw the world more clearly than Rick did in those early days. He understood that mercy got people killed, that hesitation was a death sentence. Shane killed Otis to save Carl. He wanted to execute Randall to protect the group. He understood, long before Rick did, that the living were just as dangerous as the undead. But Shane's vision came wrapped in obsession. He didn't just want to protect Lori and Carl, he wanted to own them. He convinced himself that he was the better man, the better father. And when reality refused to conform, Shane's pragmatism curdled into something darker. In the end, Shane forced Rick's hand. He led him into those woods with an unloaded gun, engineering his own death because some part of him understood what he'd become. And Rick realized exactly what Shane had been trying to tell him all along. In this world, you do what you have to do to survive, even if it means killing your brother. Shane Walsh didn't lose his humanity. He traded it, and the man he traded it to put a knife in his chest. The governor. Woodbury looked like salvation. Clean streets, electricity, a wall, and at the center was Philip Blake, the governor, smiling, welcoming, absolutely convinced he was the only thing standing between his people and oblivion. Before Woodbury, Philip was a father. When his daughter turned, something inside him broke and refused to heal. He kept her chained, brushed her hair, because letting her go meant accepting she was gone forever, and Philip Blake couldn't survive that truth. So he built Woodbury instead, a place where he controlled everything, where his word was law. He gave people safety, structure, normalcy, and in exchange, they gave him loyalty and their willingness to look away when things got dark. Because Woodbury's peace was built on violence, arena fights, raids on camps, heads in aquariums, the governor weaponized his community, turning it into a cult of personality where questioning him meant death. Michonne learned that firsthand. What he did to her wasn't about information, it was about power. When she fought back and took his eye, the governor's mask came off entirely. The attack on the prison was inevitable, not because Rick's group posed a threat, but because they represented everything the governor couldn't control. So he lied to his people and led them into war. The defining moment came in that field. Herschel on his knees, Rick trying to negotiate, the governor with Michonne's katana, choosing between humanity and brutality. He chose the blade. Herschel's head rolled. Philip Blake wanted to be the man who saved everyone. He ended up being the man who couldn't save anyone. Woodbury fell because its foundation was built on one man's refusal to accept he was broken. Terminus. Terminus didn't start as a trap. It started as a sanctuary. Those who arrive survive. The signs were everywhere. And when survivors found Terminus, they found hope. Mary cooking stew, Gareth welcoming new faces. Then the Marauders came. Bandits who locked Gareth's people in train cars, raped the women, tortured the men, ate their supplies. They proved that kindness was a liability. Eventually, Gareth fought back, killed the Marauders, reclaimed Terminus, and, starving in the aftermath, they made a choice. Never again would they be the cattle. From now on, they'd be the butchers. So they kept the signs up, kept welcoming arrivals, then locked them in train cars, stripped their supplies, led them to a trough, and slit their throats. Because Gareth had learned, you're either the butcher or the cattle. People were a resource. They brought supplies, weapons, and meat. Terminus didn't waste anything. Gareth convinced himself this was mercy, that he was freeing people from the false hope that humanity mattered. When Rick's group arrived, Gareth saw survivors worth recruiting or consuming. He told Bob, eating his leg, that it wasn't personal, just how Terminus operated now. But Terminus fell through violence. Carol brought fire, walkers brought flood, and in a church, Gareth tried to negotiate, to explain they weren't monsters. Rick didn't care. He'd made a promise in that train car. He kept it with a machete. Terminus was a warning about what happens when trauma rewrites your humanity. Gareth survived the Marauders, but he didn't survive what they turned him into. Negan. Negan didn't arrive in the apocalypse. He was made by it. Before Lucille the Bat, there was Lucille the Woman, his wife, dying of cancer in a world where medicine no longer existed and hope was harder to find than gasoline. Negan spent weeks scavenging chemotherapy, learning to administer it himself, trying to keep her alive long enough for a miracle that would never come. And when he finally came home with the medicine he needed, he found her dead in their bed, gone by her own hand, to spare him the grief of watching her turn. Negan burned it all. The house, his wife's body, everything that reminded him of the man he used to be. And from the ashes, he built something else. A survivor, a leader, a man who understood that the old world was gone and clinging to its morality was suicide. The saviors weren't a gang, they were a system. Negan saw the scattered communities and the lawless roads and realized that someone had to impose order, even if that order was brutal. So he built an empire on fear, violence, and a very simple rule. You work for me or you work for me. There was no third option. Communities gave him half their supplies. They followed his rules. And in exchange, Negan kept them safe from the walkers and from each other. He called it saving people, and in a twisted way, he was right. The saviors brought structure. They eliminated threats. They created a functioning economy where barter kept people alive. The cost was freedom. The cost was submission. The cost was watching Negan beat someone's head in with Lucille when they stepped out of line. That bat wasn't just a weapon, it was the last piece of his wife he carried with him. He wrapped it in barbed wire, named it after her, and made it the symbol of everything he'd become. Lucille the wife had represented everything good in him. Lucille the bat represented everything he'd sacrificed to survive. And when he swung it with the weight of that loss. When Negan chose Glenn and Abraham, it wasn't random. It was calculated. He picked the people whose deaths would break Rick's group the hardest, whose loss would send the clearest message. You don't fuck with the saviors. You don't challenge Negan. You accept that this is how the world works now, or you die. But Negan made one critical mistake. He thought brutality was the same as control. He thought fear would keep people in line forever. He didn't account for the fact that fear also breeds resistance, and that people pushed far enough will fight back even when the odds are impossible. The war cost him everything. The savior, the sanctuary, his identity as the man who'd rebuilt civilization. And in the end, Rick didn't kill him. Rick imprisoned him, forced him to watch as the world moved on without him, as the communities built something better than the system he'd imposed, forced him to live with what he'd done and who he'd become. But here's the thing about Negan that separates him from every other villain on this list. He changed, not immediately, not easily, but over years in that cell, and later in Alexandria, Negan confronted the man he'd been and made a genuine effort to become someone else. He saved Judith. He helped fight the Whisperers. He killed Alpha for Carol. Negan's arc isn't about redemption exactly. It's about transformation, about a man who understood that the old rules didn't work, built a new world on violence, lost everything, and then had to figure out if there was anything worth saving in himself. The apocalypse made Negan, but Negan, in the end, unmade what the apocalypse had done to him. Alpha's real name was Dee, and Dee tried to be a good mother. In the first days of the outbreak, she ran. She grabbed her daughter Lydia and fled, trying to hold on to the belief that civilization would return, that things would go back to normal, that being a good person still mattered. She joined communities. She followed rules. She tried to protect Lydia from the worst of what the world had become. And then, somewhere along the way, Dee broke. Maybe it was watching too many people die. Maybe it was realizing that every act of kindness made her vulnerable. Maybe it was killing Lydia's father to keep them both alive and watching her daughter's innocence shatter in the process. Whatever the trigger, Dee made a choice. Stop pretending to be human and start becoming something the apocalypse couldn't destroy. That's when she joined the Whisperers. Or maybe when she created them. The timeline is murky, but what's clear is that Alpha found a group of people who had made the same choice she had. Wear the skin of the dead, walk among them, become them, reject civilization entirely, and embrace the primal animal nature that kept wolves alive for millennia. The Whisperer philosophy was nihilistic and seductive. We are the end of the world. Emotions are weakness. Attachment is death. The living who cling to communities and hope and love are refusing to accept what the apocalypse has made us. We are not separate from the walkers. We are one with them. We walk, we hunt, we survive. Nothing else matters. Beta was her first true believer, a broken man grieving his friend, wearing his face as a mask, because he couldn't let go. Alpha taught him that letting go was the only way forward, that love, grief, attachment, all of it was baggage that would get you killed. She gave him a role, a rank, a place in the pack, and he became her enforcer, her weapon, her unwavering second. But Alpha's philosophy was built on a lie. She never stopped loving Lydia. She never stopped being Dee. When Lydia defected to Alexandria, Alpha carved her daughter's name into a tree, whispered to it in the dark, cried when no one was watching. She kept a shrine. She told Beta she'd killed Lydia, but the truth was she couldn't. And that contradiction between the emotionless predator she claimed to be and the grieving mother she actually was made her the most dangerous villain Rick's people ever faced. Because Alpha wasn't just ruthless, she was calculated. She didn't attack communities immediately. She studied them, sent infiltrators, used psychological warfare. She put 10 heads on pikes at the border, including Henry, Enid, and Tara, not to start a war, but to set the rules. Stay on your side. Don't cross the line. Accept that we control the dead, and if you don't respect that, we'll add your head to the collection. Alpha understood something fundamental. In the apocalypse, the dead are the ultimate weapon. She didn't need soldiers or guns. She had herds, thousands of walkers she could steer like living avalanches, burying anyone who challenged her. The Whisperers weren't a community. They were a force of nature. When Negan killed her, it was Carol's plan. Carol, who had lost too much to the Whisperers, who couldn't kill Alpha herself, but knew someone who could. Negan lured her into the woods, talked to her about Lydia, about weakness, about what it meant to be a mother. And then he slit her throat and brought her head back to Carol on a spike. Alpha died believing she'd transcended humanity. She died not realizing she'd never left it behind. Beta was a celebrity before the apocalypse. A country music star. A man whose face was on billboards, whose voice filled stadiums, whose life was defined by being seen. And when the world ended, he lost everything, including the man he loved most. When Alpha found him, he was guarding a walker in an abandoned hospital. His friend, his companion, the one person who'd seen past the fame to the man underneath. And Beta couldn't let go, couldn't destroy what was left, couldn't accept that the person he'd loved was gone. Alpha saw the pain, saw the obsession, and instead of trying to fix it, she gave him a solution. Wear your friend's face. Take his skin and make it yours. Let him become part of you. Walk with him forever. Beta did. And in the process, he erased himself entirely. He never revealed his real name, even to Alpha. He became a role, a rank, a function, the enforcer, the lieutenant, the man who turned Alpha's philosophy into action. He was massive, brutal, completely devoted, and somehow even more terrifying than his leader. Because Beta had no conflict. Alpha struggled with Lydia. Beta struggled with nothing. He'd given up his humanity so completely that there was no person left to struggle. The Whisperer's mantra, "We are the end of the world," was Alpha's creation. But Beta lived it more purely than anyone. He never wavered, never doubted. When Alpha died, he didn't grieve like a human. He grieved like a whisperer by taking her walker head, stabbing it, and finally putting her down. Then he wore pieces of her skin along with his friends, layering his identity in the dead. Beta's final act was leading a massive horde to Alexandria, not for strategy, not for survival, for vengeance, for Alpha, for the philosophy she'd built and the world she'd envisioned. He wanted to bury the living under a wave of the dead, to prove that the Whisperers had always been right, that civilization was a lie and the apocalypse was the truth. He died the way he lived, surrounded by walkers, indistinguishable from them, his face finally exposed. And in that moment, survivors recognized him, the celebrity, the star, the man who'd spent years hiding from who he used to be. Beta died the way he'd always feared, seen, the wolves. The wolves believed humanity descended from wolves, that the first people were predators who'd forgotten how to hunt, that the apocalypse was the world returning to its natural state. Owen, their leader, carved a W into his forehead. His followers did the same. They built traps using walkers, lured survivors to their deaths, left wolves not far spray-painted as their calling card. They talked about building a walker army, about freeing people from false safety, but they had no endgame, no structure, no vision beyond chaos. They attacked Alexandria. Brutal, random, pointless. They killed, raided, and left. Morgan captured Owen during the assault. In their conversations, cracks appeared in the wolf philosophy. Owen was intelligent, articulate, and fundamentally empty. He'd convinced himself killing was natural and mercy was weakness, but he had no answer for what came after. The wolves died quickly. Carol killed most. Morgan's refusal to kill Owen eventually saved Denise when Owen, bitten and dying, helped her escape a horde. In his final moments, he showed more humanity than he'd ever shown as a wolf. The wolves proved that chaos isn't strength, and tearing things down is easier than building anything worth keeping. Jadis. Jadis wasn't always Jadis. She was Anne, an art teacher who found refuge in a junkyard after the outbreak and built something strange and new. The scavengers spoke in broken English, not because they'd forgotten how to talk, but because Jadis decided that giving her people their own language would bond them together faster. The odd speech, the minimalist lifestyle, the art projects made from trash, all of it was deliberate. Theater designed to create a civilization from scratch in a hurry. But underneath the theater, Jadis was a pragmatist. The scavengers' philosophy was simple. We take, we don't bother. They scavenged, they traded, they stayed out of conflicts and looked out for themselves. When Rick came looking for allies against Negan, Jadis negotiated, then betrayed him for a better deal, then switched back. Loyalty wasn't in her vocabulary, only leverage. What nobody knew was that Jadis was trading people, not just goods, people, to the CRM, the Civic Republic Military, an organization powerful enough to still operate helicopters years into the apocalypse. Jadis marked survivors as A's or B's, the strong, the leaders, the dangerous. Those were A's, and they were infected and sent to research facilities. The useful, the compliant, those were B's, and they were shipped to the Civic Republic to work. Heath disappeared on a supply run. Jadis took him. Rick ended up in a container marked with an A. Jadis was planning to trade him too. She operated in the shadows, trafficking humans for supplies, for safety, for a ticket into the Civic Republic herself. When Simon and the Saviors massacred the scavengers, Jadis watched everyone she'd built her community with get turned into walkers. She led them to an industrial shredder and ground them into pulp. Then she dropped the broken English, dropped the persona, and became Anne again. But Anne with nothing left to lose. She saved Rick's life when she found him bleeding out by the river, convinced the CRM to extract them both. And from that moment forward, Anne was gone. Jadis Stokes, taking Gabriel's surname because part of her still cared about the man she'd left behind, became a warrant officer in the CRM, a true believer in their mission to preserve humanity, even if it meant genocide to do it. By the end, Jadis was the only character to appear in 3 Walking Dead shows. She trafficked people, betrayed communities, helped cover up mass murder, but she did it, all believing she was protecting the last light of the world. And when Rick and Michonne finally stopped her, She died almost relieved, because Jadis had spent years trying to be two people at once, Anne the artist and Jadis the soldier, and neither one could survive what she'd done. Simon. Simon was Negan's right hand, charming, ruthless, the guy who delivered threats with a smile and executed orders with enthusiasm. But Simon enjoyed the violence too much. Negan had rules. Kill to make a point, not for fun. Take half, not everything. Control people with fear, don't exterminate them. Simon never agreed. He wanted to crush resistance completely. The breaking point came with the scavengers. After Jadis's betrayal, Simon was sent to negotiate. Instead, he massacred them, every single scavenger except Jadis, because he believed extermination sent a stronger message than negotiation. Negan was furious, not because Simon killed, Negan killed constantly, but because Simon acted outside the system. His decision threatened everything Negan had built. Simon's final play was a coup. He tried to turn the saviors against Negan, arguing Negan's rules made them weak. For a moment, it almost worked, but Negan challenged him to a fight, beat him in front of everyone, and proved the saviors followed strength. Simon died believing he was more ruthless than Negan. He was, but ruthlessness wasn't the same as leadership. Negan built an empire. Simon would have burned it down. The Commonwealth. The Commonwealth was the dream that refused to die. 50,000 people, a functioning government, police, courts, ice cream shops, civilization pretending the apocalypse never happened. Governor Pamela Milton ran it with ruthless efficiency. The Commonwealth had class systems, wealth inequality, jobs assigned based on pre-outbreak status. If you were a lawyer before, you became a lawyer again. If you were a janitor, you stayed a janitor. The apocalypse hadn't leveled society. It had frozen it in place. But the stability was a lie. Pamela's son Sebastian was a coward who sent people on suicide missions to retrieve meaningless cash from Walker Building. When they died, the Commonwealth covered it up. Pamela was more concerned with maintaining order than achieving justice. She manipulated communities, used the CRM's resources without accountability, treated citizens as assets. When Eugene exposed Sebastian's crimes, Pamela tried to turn the people against the coalition rather than admit guilt. The Commonwealth fell not because it was attacked, but because it couldn't reconcile what it pretended to be with what it was. It wanted to be the old world reborn, but the old world was built on inequality and exploitation, and people had learned those systems were never worth preserving. Pamela ended up in prison. The Commonwealth survived under new leadership. Leadership that understood the apocalypse wasn't something to undo, but something to build on top of. If you made it this far, you already know what to do. Like, subscribe, and drop in the comments. Which villain understood the apocalypse better than Rick ever did?